Fueled by war and instability in neighbouring Iraq, Syria has a thriving illegal sex trade. And it's Iraqi girls as young as 10 who are being kidnapped or forced into false marriages to work as prostitutes. The ABC's Antoinette Shihar worked undercover in the capital Damascus and spoke exclusively to women affected by the sex trade.
Damascus at night, bustling and vibrant. Its souks and religious sites, magnets for tourists. But hiding in the sandhills just outside the city is a more sinister side to the capital. Rows of garishly lit nightclubs. Locals describe this place as their very own Las Vegas. We took our hidden cameras into the heart of the city's brothel district. Here we learned that most of these girls are Iraqi teenage refugees. They're paraded and sold to leering customers wanting sex.
The issue of trafficking, especially from Iraq, young girls are brought to the country either through convenient marriages or with fake passports to be engaged into prostitution.
A lot of girls do this. It's mainly because of poverty, and it's the only work that brings in a lot of money. And there are no work opportunities here for the Iraqis, especially for girls.
Experts working to combat the problem say poverty has driven women into the trade.
The vulnerability of women alone and young girls alone, or young girls who are also too poor to survive, are more likely to become victim of trafficking.
Syria has the largest Iraqi refugee population in the world, and they usually end up in urban slums like this one, Sayda Zainab, just outside the nation's capital. Samira lives in Sayda Zainab with her youngest daughter. She's one of 1.5 million Iraqi refugees living in Syria. 5 years ago, in war-torn Iraq, she struggled to provide for her disabled husband, son and 3 daughters.
I worked and bought things while he just got drunk and beat me. We were hungry and poor. I wanted to save them from their father and from hunger. Did you see hunger in Iraq? After the occupation, all the stealing and robbing.
Desperate, she married off her 2 older girls, aged 14 and 10, to brothers who were several years older. But soon after the wedding, she learnt her daughters were being taken to Syria on false passports.
Soon after, 3 days or a week, I came to Syria. I found them and went to them. During the day, I saw everything normal, but at night, I saw all this makeup on my daughters. And not only my daughters, but 2 other girls as well. They were beaten time after time.
In Damascus, Samira discovered that her daughters lived with other young Iraqi girls. Their house was frequented by groups of men until the early hours of the morning. Often, eldest daughter Iman would leave and not return until dawn.
She told me they take them out, for money, to the farms with men from the Gulf. There were Saudis and others. They'd take them to the farms, and then they would dance and then sleep with them. I swear to God. And one of the men would take the money. I couldn't talk anymore. I was sick, stunned.
Samira went to the Syrian authorities, but they turned her away. Within days, the traffickers had moved, taking the girls with them. The older girl managed to escape back to Iraq, but 10-year-old Rajette wasn't so lucky. She was on-sold to traffickers.
Where is my younger girl? I don't know.
For 5 years, Samira has lived in Syria, searching for her daughter Rajette, who would now be just 15 years old.
Where have they taken her? What are they doing to her? I don't want to think about it. 5 years waiting for God's mercy, nothing, and I'm searching for her.
Like Samira, thousands of Iraqi women and teenage girls who have sought refuge in Syria aren't allowed to work. Those who register with the UNHCR get an average $42 a month on which to live. Their vulnerability has made Syria the Middle East's sex tourism hotspot. The US State Department's report on trafficked persons found the trade is largely serving men from other Middle Eastern countries.
A significant number of women and children in the large Iraqi refugee community in Syria are forced into sexual exploitation by criminal gangs or, in some cases, their families. Iraqi families arrange for young girls to work in clubs and to be married, often multiple times, to men for the sole purpose of prostitution.
But the Syrian government is underplaying its sex tourism problem.
It's
not expected that we'll be a centre. We don't compare ourselves to other countries like Thailand or the Philippines.
Nevertheless, the government has passed tough new counter-trafficking laws, providing heavy prison sentences and fines, and for the first time, not charging trafficked women with prostitution.
But I reiterate that for us prevention is more important than the cure. Syria, out of its care to combat this phenomenon before it happens or before it spreads widely, has enacted this law.
Dr. Ibrahim Daraji, a legal expert on counter-trafficking in the Middle East, helped draft the new law.
First, this law provides special protection for women and children. This law makes criminal penalties stricter as never before and imposes very high monetary penalties as well. At the moment, this law faces a challenge of implementation.
There hasn't been a single trafficking conviction since the laws were passed in April. It comes as no surprise to Iraqi refugee sisters Rula and Muna, who now live in a safe house in Damascus. They're too scared to talk to police about their terrifying experience. Earlier this year, 2 Iraqi women dressed in burqas forced their way into the girls' small Damascus apartment, held knives to their throats, and demanded they work for them as nightclub dancers.
She said, "We want you to work with us." I asked what kind of work, but from her manner, "You are pretty girls. I will have you do work that will bring you a lot of money." The way she talked, and she said words that are dirty words.
Luckily, they managed to flee their kidnappers.
If I see these 2 women, and I hope not to see them, killing them would be too little. We were saved from them, but surely some others fell into their hands.
So why didn't the girls go to the police?
They threatened us. "If you tell the police, we will bring men into your house." So I think that they were watching our movements. Well, we are girls, Iraqis, and living by ourselves. So how can I go and report it to the police?
Sometimes they become victims of trafficking by people who are close to them. And to come forward, they are afraid the consequences of such fact. And a lot of women who are victims of trafficking, they're not aware of this fact.
Even if Iraqi girls manage to escape Syria's sex trade, where do they go? Their families have been torn apart, their homes in Iraq destroyed, or too dangerous to return to.
Most Iraqi victims of trafficking are also refugees. When we deal with other victims of trafficking, we think, okay, we will help them.
Muna and Rula say they can't go back to Baghdad. Their parents are living in Europe, but they have neither the money or approval to join them. As long as they remain refugees in Syria, the sisters can't live normal lives. They're confined to a safe house overseen by nuns and never go out in public alone.
We feel reassured because we are with the nuns, but what's going to happen tomorrow, I don't know. We won't be so lucky next time round.
Back in the notorious red light district of Damascus, Samira's painful search for her daughter continues. She's just received a tip that Rajette was seen dancing in one of these nightclubs.
They say they bring her here at night and make her dance for the men. I don't sleep. My heart is burnt.
In one of these nightclubs. Samira won't give up hope.
I haven't left a place I haven't searched. I hope I find her.
Antoinette Chiha with that report.
It took U.S. airstrikes against ISIS positions, airlifts of U.S. and international aid, and rescue efforts by Kurdish Peshmerga forces to help thousands of Yazidis escape imminent danger from ISIS forces in northern Iraq. But the nightmare continues for hundreds of Yazidi girls and women, unable to get out of harm's way, who are being sold by ISIS to its fighters in Syria, according to a human rights group. In the past few weeks, ISIS has distributed or sold about 300 Yazidi girls and women it abducted in Iraq, according to the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, a UK-based monitoring group aligned with the opposition in Syria. Who are the Yazidis and why does ISIS want to kill them? In ISIS' eyes, the girls and women are slaves of the spoils of war with the infidels, the Syria monitors said. According to the human rights group, the terrorists sold the girls and women for about $1,000 each, claiming they had converted to Islam so that they can marry ISIS fighters. The human rights group documented at least 27 cases of women who were sold and married to ISIS militants in the Aleppo suburbs, Raqqa suburbs and Al-Hasaka. ISIS, which calls itself the Islamic State, was previously referred to as the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria.
تسلط بیشتر داشته باشن کنترل چیه مشهوده کجا رفت حالا دستور ارشاده کل سینما می‌رسیم بالا باشید که مثلا مختار الان بوده
فردا اینجا میریزم مسلح دهن منو سرویس میکنن شما رو هم میگیرن تازه میگن چرا پخش کرد به خدا بهتون گیر میدن با اجازه
یه اتاق خیلی کوچیک گرفتم با بچه‌م بعد دیگه کار کردم دیگه البته پشیمونم که این راهو رفتم چون دیگه غرق شدم تو این راه ولی بازم احساس میکنم راهی که باید میرفتم دیگه و رفتم این راه البته هنوز به آخرش نرسیدم چون هنوز 30 سالمه ولی دیگه تا 1-2 سال دیگه به آخرش میرسم.
متاسفانه به هر جایی که مراجعه کردم در وهله اول سعی میکنن از من یه معشوقه درست کنن با حقوق خیلی کم.
الان شرایط ما تو ایران طوریه که این کارو دخترای تو سن خیلی پایین شروع کردن، 14-15 ساله دارن این کار رو انجام میدن. پس در واقع موقعیت خراب شده دیگه. اگه وضعیتی پیش بیاد که خانمایی که متارکه میکنن بتونن یه زندگی راحتی داشته باشن، کرایه خونه و این مسائل یه خورده سبک باشه، شاید اصلا خیلی به این مسائل گرایش پیدا نکنن. خانمایی که متارکه میکنن تو مملکت ما هیچ جایی ندارن، اصلا رده خارجن، جز جنازه های مملکتن. اینو واقعا جدی میگم.
من از شما سوال میکنم، وقتی که من به عنوان یک معلمه میخوام پاک زندگی کنم، وارد خونه استاد دانشگاه میشم، به من پیشنهاد 50,000 تومان حقوق میکنه و معشوقه بودن. وقتی من وارد اداره میشم که با توجه به که تحصیلات دارم و میتونم خوب صحبت کنم و کارهای منشیگری رو واردم، به من پیشنهاد 35,000 تومان حقوق میکنن با معشوقه بودن. خب من معشوقه این آقا بشم با مای 35,000 تومان، در حال جسم خودم آلوده کردم. آلودگی چه 1 نفر چه 10 نفر.
تو یه دونه اتاقم اگه زندگی کنم باز خودم باید خلاف کنم زندگیمو بگذرونم، پس هیچ فرقی نمیکنه. پس میرم یه آپارتمان میگیرم، درصد خلافم بالا میبرم.
من زمانی که با خودم تنها میشم، با توجه به اینکه گاهی شعر میگم یا با ساز دلم زندگی میکنم، شما مطمئن باشه که من از این مسئله رنج میبرم. ولی بهتون گفتم رنج من یا استرس های من باعث نمیشه که من بخوام از واقعیت زندگی کردن و نفس کشیدن فرار بکنم.
انقدر این دختر شهرستانی ها رو می آوردن. دختر شهرستانی به خاطر اینکه طول راهو، یعنی از دهشون تا تهران پول ندن، تو جاده خودشون رو در اختیار این راننده کامیوندارا میذاشتن. یعنی دیگه ما دقیقا دیدیم دیگه، یعنی خودشون به زبانشون واسه ما تعریف میکردن.
فساد کل جامعه رو گرفته، چون خونه به خونه است، چون در به دره. یعنی شما وقتی وارد کوچه‌ای بشین نمیدونین این خونه آیا سالمه یا این خونه ناسالمه، آیا خونه بغلی خونه تیمی یا خونه تیمی نیست.
من دختر میشستم واسه یه ناهار میره سکس میکنه، شکم این چیزا حالش نی، باید خودش رو سیر کنه.
یا اون خانواده که بچه‌شو پاره جیگرشو داره میفروشه به یه خونه تیمی و خودش آگاهه، فکر میکنین چرا این کارو میکنه. پس اون خانواده ناچاره از پاره جیگرش بگذره، اونو بفروشه با دست خودش که بتونه 5 نفر دیگر رو سیر کنه.
دخترای جوونم زیاد تو این کار افتادن. نمیشه ازشون ایراد گرفت آقا، برای اینکه شرایط زندگیشون اینا رو وادار میکنه به این مسائل.
واقعا بیپولی و شیر و خشک بچه بود. اول رفتم گدایی کرد، میدون آمد بدون شفتم گدایی کرد. دیگه دیدم میشینم میدون میام میگم گدایی نکن تو قشنگی، حیفی 10 تومن بیا بریم به 10 تومن میدم، یکی میگیمد 20 تومن. تا اینکه دیگه سوار ماشین میشدم که واقعا کمک بگیرم به جون بچم، به قول کمک بگیرم فقط به خاطر شیر و خشک بچم. 1000 تومن به خاطر شیر و خشک بچم که بچم گشنه نمونه. واقعا دوست نداشتم این کارو کنم، اصلا دوست ندارم، الانم اصلا دوست ندارم، اصلا دوست ندارم.
چی بگم که خودم اصلا فکرشو نمی‌کردم زمانی بخواد مثلا همچین بلایی سر خودم بیاد، اصلا فکرشو نمی‌کردم. خدا شاهده به جون بچه‌ها. یعنی چون که خیلی زود ازدواج کرده بودم، 14 سالم بود ازدواج کردم و خیلی هم دوستش داشتم، ولی مسئله جدایی و نداری باعث شد حتی اولین باری که من این کارو کردم 4-5 ماه پیش به خاطر کرایه خونه شد. دیدم صاحبخونه میره میاد در میزنه، چیکار کنم؟ گفتم میزنم به سیماقه هر چه باد و باد.
تو این جامعه ما فکر میکنم که
برای ماها که خرج یک خانواده رو میدیم بهترین شغل باشه، چون هر چیزی که بخوام بریم اولا که با تحصیلات کم استخدام نمی کنن، بعدش هم این که بخوان اگر استخدام کنن بخوان اول خودشون استفاده کنن از طرف، یعنی که حقوقشون خیلی کمه.
مملکت ما اینقدر مملکت تخمیه، سکس یه قضیه خیلی قشنگه مثلا درون مرد و زن و باید اینو به نفع احسن ازش استفاده کنی، ولی با اونی که دلت دنبالشه و دوستش داری. خب ولی تو مملکت ما کثیف‌ترین چیز سکس قرار دادن، یعنی منبع درآمد. و زمانی که من خودم در اختیارش یه آقای نوعی میذارم به ازای مثلا بدنم، به ازای هیکلم ازش پول میگیرم، پس این سکس نمیشه گفت. و کاش میشد آدم اگه خلافم میکنه از با سکسش پول پیدا نکنه.
ولی اصلا سکس یه غذای طبیعی انسانه. همونجور که من به چایی، به غذا، به نفس و به هوایی که تو این اتاقم نیاز دارم، یک انسان به سکس نیاز داره. ولی اگر سکس در جامعه ما به این صورت مطرح شده، به صورت پنهانی مطرح میشه، به صورت خرید و فروش انسان ها مطرح میشه، به صورت دوگانگی ها مطرح میشه، فقط به خاطر محدودیت جامعه ماست که این کلمه رو خیلی زشت و وقیح میخوان نشون بدن. مثلا در این رابطه که ما داریم زندگی میکنیم، احساس، عاطفه، جسم، روح همه میمیره. دیگه چیزی وجود نداره که آدم بخواد بهش دل ببنده یا بخواد باهاش زندگی بکنه.
الان از نظر روحی هیچکی ارضا نمیشه توی مملکت ها، هیچکی. یعنی شاید از نظر جسمی شما یه سکس با من داشته باشی 10 دقیقه ارضاشی از نظر جسمی، ولی از نظر روحی با منم که روبروت نشستم شما ارضا نمیشی، با هیچکی نمیشی. چون مملکتی نیست که بتونی توش راحت زندگی کنی، راحت قدرت بیان داشته باشی، راحت بتونی با یکی صحبت کنی. من شاید خیلی حرفا تو دلم باشه ولی نمیتونم به شما بزنم، از خیلی چیزا میترسم. شما هم اینطور باید همه چی رو تو خودت خنثی کنی.
الان جامعه به صورت در اومده که یک زن احساس میکنه فقط علاوه فروش تنش میتونه نیازشو برآورده کنه، کار نیست. اگر میری نه به کار توجهی دارن، فقط به هیکلت و به سکست و به صورتت نگاه میکنن، بر مبنای اون حقوق میدن و بر مبنای اون میخوان بخرنت. خب شما خودتون در نظر بگیرید، منی که نمیخوام آلوده باشم، منی که نمیخوام گناه کنم، منی که حالا از البته انسانی مثلا به دینم، به جامعه‌ام و به مریضی اجتماعم هیچ کاری ندارم، منی که میخوام سالم زندگی کنم، کی بعد از من حمایت کنه؟ جامعه، قانون، خانواده‌ام. هیچکی که ندارم، پس چیکار کنم؟ تنمو میفروشم.
تو هر شغلش، تو هر صنفی، تو هر جایی که شما بخوای بری کار کنه همینه. آقای عزیز، من یه مسئله داشتم برای همین قیومیت بچه‌م، رفتم دادگاه مدنی خواست. خب چند سال پیش رفتم پیش رئیس دادگاه و گفتم آقا من اصلا قاطی کردم دیگه، روانی شدم، تو رو خدا من فکر کنم من کنیز در خونه پدر مادرتم، کلفت در خونه پدر مادرتم، یه قیومیت منو بده، قیومیت این بچه‌م رو من خواهم از ایران برم. فکر میکنه یارو آخونده من چی گفت؟ بگو من کنیز نمیخوام، خانوم میخوام. تمام شد دیگه. دادگاه شما بالاتر میخواد؟ آخونده این مملکت به من گفت من خانوم میخوام، کنیز نمیخوام. گفتم اگه شما زن نداری، گفت چند تا میخواد؟ بابا این محضرداری که من رفتم طلاقمو گرفتم، هنوز طلاق نگرفته بودم، به من اینجوری کرد تو خیلی جوانی طلاق نگیر، من اینجا زن شوهردار اقدام میکنم، مرد زندار رو اقدام میکنم، اینو سیغه اون میکنم، اونو ببین. من از این کارا زیاد میکنم. بذار اسم شوهر تو شناسنامه‌ات باشه، تو رو عقد یکی دیگه میکنم، عقد هر کی که دوستش باشی. گفتم مگه میشه آدم 2 تا شوهر داشته باشه؟ کوفا پول بده. مملکتیه که هر طرفش رو نگاه میکنی تش باد میده آقای است. هر طرف رو نگاه میکنی. بله میتونم سیگار بکشم؟ این راه خلافی که خانوما به عبارت یه نوع شغل تو زندگیشون میدونن، زن رو پیر میکنه، شکسته از نظر روحی، فکری، داغون میکنه، استرس به آدم دست میده. یعنی من بارها شده تشنج اعصاب گرفتم، یعنی دستام میلرزیده، ولی فقط از خدا میخواستم که گفتم خدا یه وسیله، یه چیزی تو زندگی من قرار بده که من از این راه بکشم بیرون.
معلش في مجال الصوت ما يطلعش الصورة.
The women of Syria weep for lost sons. But now they weep for themselves and their daughters too. They fled here in search of safety and shelter, yet find themselves exposed to exploitation and abuse. On a dusty plain in the desert, the Zatari refugee camp in Jordan is home to 100,000 people and grows bigger every day. But deep within the camp, there's no sanctuary for the women, just fear. Many left husbands, brothers and sons behind. Now they're preyed on by men, roaming free in a lawless place.
مش خوف، رعب، حياة رعب عشت بالخيمة، ولا كل الناس نايمة إلا أني ما أقدر أنام، لأذان الفجر أظل.
And this is what they're afraid of.
خطفوا كثير بنات، خطفوهم وشغلوهن، 3 بمخيمنا انخطفوا، وإجوا زين رجعوهم بمخيمنا. الشباب الأرادنة بيجوا بيتحرشوا بالسوريات من 7 ل6 سنين، بدهم يخطفوهن ويطلعوهن لبرا، فحتى الطفل القد هاي عم بتحرشوها.
A trip to the toilet at night is now too terrifying for many women in this part of the camp.
طبعا انا باجي مع بنتي وبضل واقفه لها بالضبط انها تطلع للحمام، ما فيش اضويه، تيجي عتمه بالليل. يعني انت تقدر تفوتي على الحمام، بجوز واحد نفسه ضعيف يفوت، يعني اسال اختها هي واحده تقدر تفوت، ما تقدرش تفوت الحمام. انا مره كبيره متجوزه وعندي اولاد ولاد شباب، ما استرجيش اجي على الحمام لحالي. عندي من 10 معاش استرجاعي خلص.
The men come mainly from Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states. In the guise of donors, they offer charity, but in return, demand a wife. But these are marriages of convenience, for the men at least, often lasting just a matter of weeks or even days. Abu Sanad is a father of 2 girls.
يعني مثل ما قلت بيجيني شباب من برا، هلا أرادنا بيجوا شباب من برا، من السعودية، من قطر، بدكم تزوجوا بناتكم، بدكم تزوجوا ما بعرف شو. يعني شو شايفيننا احنا مثل ما بقولوا هلا في سوق بيع، يعني سوق غنم. والله أهم من سوق غنم. يعني شو أنتم شايفين ما معنا فلوس، يعني خلاص بدكم تستغلونا. والله أعطيني جوزني بنتك مثلا 200,000 أو 100,000 أو 50,000 ليرة سوري، يعني ما بطلعناش 100 دينار أو 150 دينار أو 200 دينار أو 300 دينار. استغلال للعالم.
سعودي قال لي بعيشك أميرة، وأنا ما قبلت. وحتى مساعدته يعني إنه ما عاش بدي منك أي شيء، بس إنه قبل مني هاي المساعدة ما رضيت أقبلها.
Lama, a divorced woman with children, says she was forced to flee Zatari after relentless pressure to marry. We found her in a safe house outside the camp in Amman. She told us after she repeatedly refused many propositions, her tent was burnt down.
في بنات بيقبلوا للزواج، في بنات بيكونوا يعني كمان معانين بسبب الحرب وهالاشياء هاي، فبيكونوا بحاجه انه حدا مثلا يستر عليهم او شيء او هاي، بيكون شخصيته مثلا ضعيفه وبحاجه يعني ماده او بحاجه ملابس.
Alongside the everyday essentials, they still try to sell dreams here. Weddings are a burgeoning business, but many are the so-called pleasure marriages, where women are effectively bought for sex, but the wedding provides a religious seal of approval, bringing respectability. On a street in downtown Amman, we secretly meet the marriage broker, Majed, a 28-year-old housewife from Homs who makes money offering up Syrian girls for sale.
50 دينار 100 دينار 1000 دينار إذا بدي يتجوز يدفع 1000. لا شوفي هيك بفوت بحجابه وبيشرب فنجانه وبيحط ال100 وبيمشي. بده يدفع 1000 وأكثر. بده جوازة نظامية، يتجوز يكتب كتابه يصطفى إن شاء الله بعد ساعة بطلعه.
A million miles away from the dust and heat of Zatari, Gulf men come to play in the plush resorts. We found one Saudi sheikh on a charity mission who explains the attraction of Syrian women who are now refugees.
صار السورية الحين مثلا زواجها رخيص يعني ما هو غالي، وإنسانة مش متطلبة، يعني في الخليج صار عندنا تطلبات في الحياة صعبة على أغلب الشعب. فصار الزواج من السورية يعني كاقتصاديا أحسن للشخص السعودي.
كانوا هنيك يحلموا حلم ياخذ سورية، بس وصلت الأيام اسودته وصار فينه ياخذ سورية.
Sheikh Abu Hamad from Homs runs the mosque inside the camp. He's not fooled by the endless stream of men asking for help to find a wife. He says their real motives are pretty clear.
قال عندك عائلات بس نسائية، نسوان بس فقط بدون رجال. أنا بتكفله وبطلعه وبحط كل 10 نساء بغرفة ببيت. طيب أنتوا شو تعمل بهدول 10 نساء بالبيت؟ قلت له يا عمي شو عندي معرض عرايس أنا؟ قال يا عمي أنا بالحلال. قلت له حال بالحلال أو بالحرام، عمرك 60 سنة، ليش أنت ما عندك زوجة ما عندك أولاد؟
في سعودي كان عمره 60 سنة جوز بنته 13 سنة. نحن ما هان علينا إنه نحن السوريين ما لهالدرجة وصلت فينا المواصيل.
The barbed wire is deceptive. Inside the camp, there's precious little security. The residents are taking matters into their own hands. Outraged at the number of men entering the camp, vigilantes have set up watch committees to patrol the area and protect their women. Ahmed Homsi from Dara is a member of one such patrol.
خطف كثير عم بيصير، يعني الشباب اللي اطلعنا لابسين ملايات حلقنا رموشهم وشعرهم مشان كل عالم تعرف نشوف شو منهن، بياخذها شهر وشهرين بتمتع فيها وبتتركها. هذا الشيء عندنا يعني بصير شيء يعني مش بلا يعني شيء كثير يوم عن يوم عم بكتر.
There are valiant attempts at normality in the camp. The UNICEF school has 5,000 children on the roll. But even here, they see unusually high numbers of teenage girls dropping out after getting pregnant. And elsewhere in the camp too, life is anything but normal.
ما في مي ما في حلبيات ما في شيء ما يقدر نغسل يدينا هون بالمطبخ ما في خزانات ما في كهرباء ما في شيء ما في الدول العربية مؤامرة على الشعب السوري حطوهم هون تحت خيام أي شيء دغري الخيمة بتولع فينا.
For now, the authorities have bigger problems on their hands. The young men are angry and frustrated and have nothing to do. Several riots have broken out in the camp, and Darak riot units remain permanently on standby. The United Nations says it's working hard with the Jordanian government to set up proper policing and have announced a new security initiative. It can't come soon enough. The women of Zaatari feel forsaken by the world, but especially by their fellow Arabs.
بس لما طلعنا انحرمنا كل شيء حتى انحرمنا أحسن شيء بالبني آدم تعرف شو هو؟ حرمنا الكرامة.
For so long out of sight, the focus of the conflict so often the freedom fighters and martyrs. The women fled across the border to escape the fighting, but for many the supposed refuge has offered anything but. As the Syrian crisis spirals further into chaos, what is to become of the women and girls of the revolution?
ارجع سوريا نفسي حط ايدي هيك تحت العنبية اشرب مي نفسي اشوف هواها لبلادي ان شاء الله برجع لها انا تفرق معي حتى لو ضل ولا لو راح المهم ارجع على سوريا ما يصير فينا مثل الفلسطينيين طلعوا ما عاد رجعوا.
Jordan provides a refuge. There is at least stability here. But with the economic collapse back in Syria, more and more women are coming here now to work as prostitutes. We've been told of growing numbers operating in brothels here in Amman and in the border areas. The war has created a desperation that is pushing women to sell themselves for money.
Using secret filming, we spoke with several women caught up in the trade. One woman said she'd lost her job in Damascus because of the war. But prostitution isn't the only way young Syrian women become a commodity. Others are married off to older men from the Gulf for up to £2,000, money to support their families. They can be sexually exploited and abandoned. As this teenager discovered after 2 months of marriage.
I can't describe him as a man. The way he treated me. He treated me savagely. He was a monster. He was hitting me so much. The bruises are still on my body. He changed and said that I don't love you. And I only married you for pleasure.
Destitute families approach marriage brokers like this woman, a refugee herself. What do you feel about being involved in making marriages like this?
سألتني على شعوري. طيب اسأله حالك.
You ask me what I feel about doing this? Ask yourself, how would you feel if one of your children didn't have anything to eat or drink? How would you feel? Answer me and then I'll answer you.
And this is what they're afraid of.
خطفوا كثير بنات، خطفوهم وشغلوهن. 3 بمخيمنا انخطفوا واجوا زين رجعهم بمخيمنا. الشباب اللي أرادنا بيجوا بيتحرشوا بالسوريات من 7 ل6 سنين، بدهم يخطفوهن ويطلعوهن لبرا، فحتى الطفل القد هاي عم بتحرشوها.
كثير عم بيصير، يعني الشباب اللي اطلعنا لابسين ملايات حلقنا رموشهم وشعرهم مشان كل العالم تعرف شو منهن، بياخذها شهر وشهرين بتمتع فيها وبتتركها. هذا الشيء عندنا يعني بصير شيء يعني مش بلا آية، يعني شيء كثير يوم عن يوم عم بكتر.
That you are responsible for what's happening there. What? I'm not Bashar. I'm not this bloodthirsty regime. I didn't kill no one. I didn't rape anyone. I'm a good person. I want to convince you today that what is happening there and in other places in the world, you are sharing this responsibility. You are part of the problem. You are part of the reason why this test has fallen on the Ummah of Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And the tests take turn. Never think you're secure. One day, Syria was safe. And tests were other places. Now, Syria's turn. Tomorrow, Egypt's turn. The day after, Yemen's turn. The day after that, you never know, my brothers. Because look at the Ummah, my brothers. Look at our Ummah. Look at the Ummah of Islam, the Ummah of Deen, the Ummah of Tawheed. Look where we are now. Look in the hearts of the Ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. What do we really have? Is it love of Allah and His Prophet, the Book of Allah, the orders of Allah, or love of dunya and racing and competition over dunya? Attachment to dunya, shahawat, desires, problems, and deen, majiru, on the side. The truth is, my brothers, the concern we have in our hearts for the Ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is not really there. Wallahi, wallahi, there are some people without faith, non-Muslims outside there, who went to Syria trying to help, out of a human feeling. Not because of Islamic emotion or, God or this or Allah or Jannah or feeling responsibility. Human feelings. Even these human feelings, they're not existing in our hearts sometimes. Allah will not ask you what the heads of committees did. Allah will ask you, what did you do? You saw haram, you saw corruption, you saw fasad, you saw sin. What did you do for Allah's deen?
اسمي روان ميلاد قداح، مواليد 97. أبي اسمه ميلاد موسى قداح. عائلتنا مؤلفة من 7، أبي وأمي ونحن أخواتي 5. أبي كان يشتغل قبل الأحداث مزارع، يعني كان عنده أراضي يزرعن وكذا. مع بداية وطبعا قبل الأحداث أنا وأبي كان دائما أفكارنا متناقضة مع بعضها، يعني أي شغلة كنت أعملها كان هو يضربني عليها، وبعد أي نقاش بيني وبين أبي كنت أعرف إنه في قتل بالنسبة لإلي. مع بداية الأحداث طلعت مظاهرات، بعد هيك مظاهرات مسلحة. مع بداية المظاهرات المسلحة أبي صار يفوت لعنا مسلحين على البيت، كان أحيانا يفوت عنا 3 أو 4، وكان معهم سلاحهم طبعا بارود روسي، وغير هيك أنا كان يفوتوا معي سلاح تاني بس أنا ما كنت أعرف شو هو نوعه. أنا استغربت من هذا الشيء. 15 يوم يعني أبي لا أمي لا أخواتي يفوتوا لعندي بغرفة معزولة تماما عن الوضع الخارجي برا، لا تلفزيون ولا تليفون، يعني غير أطلع الحمام وفوت بس. يعني كان وقتها بهاي الفترة استغربت من تصرف أبي إنه مدللني يعني بالأكل بالشرب، يجيب لي شو بدي، بس يعني ما نعني عن التواصل الاجتماعي البراني بالمرة، حتى المدرسة ما يعني إنه أروح عليها. بعد فترة 15 يوم إجا أبي لعندي، فعم بيقول لي إنه كرمال روح على الحمام كرمال أتحمم. فأنا استغربت منه وفرحت بنفس الوقت إنه بده يفوتني على الحمام بعد 15 يوم. فورا أخذت ثيابي ورحت على الحمام. وأنا عم أتحمم هونيك إجا عندي واحد تقريبا عمره فوق 50 سنة، فهو ما كان لابس غير ثيابه الداخلية، فحاول إنه يعتدي علي بالحمام، بس هو ما حسن. يعني الحمام ضيق وأنا كنت صرخ وعيط، فما حسن إنه يعمل شي بالحمام، فشدني من شعري وأخذني على الغرفة. وأنا عم صرخ وعيط بالغرفة كان أبي سمعاني يعني، بس هو ما إجا لا ساعدني ولا حتى إنه طالع الزلمة من عندي. فهذا الزلمة اعتدى علي، كنت أنا عزراء بهذاك الوقت، فهو اللي فك لي بكارتي. بعد هيك فورا ما في ثانيتين ولا إنه فايت زلمة تاني لعندي، يعني لسه ما لحق هداك يطلع قام فات لعندي واحد تاني. قمت أنا كمان بنفس الوقت صرت صرخ وعيط وكذا، بس أثناء إني عم أصرخ وبعده عني قمت غبت عن الوعي وما عاد وعيت على شي لفترة تقريبا صحيت بعد ربع أو ثلث ساعة. بعد هيك بعد ما صحيت إنه صرت ناديت لأبوي، اجى ابي لعندي على الغرفة، فانا عم قل له انه ليش هيك عملت واجوا لعندي وكذا، وليش ما فتت لعندي وانقذتني منهم وكذا وهيك. فهو عم بيقول لي انه معلش هذا كلياته جهاد، وكل ما انت عملتي هي الشغلات، كل ما خليتي واحد من المجاهدين ينام معك، كل ما زادت حسناتك وقلت سيئاتك، وحتى لو متي رح تموتي شهيدة وفورا رح تفوتي على الجنة. ويعني صار انه يحكي لي انه هذا كلياته جهاد. بعد ما اعتدوا علي هدول الاثنين انا صابني نزيف وضل معي النزيف فترة 20 يوم. فطلبت من ابي انه يجيب لي ادوية او ياخذني على الدكتور، فهو كان يرفض، ما كان لا ياخذني ولا يجيب لي ادوية. طبعا فترة 20 يوم هدول يعني ابي ما كان يفوت لعند حدا لانه كان يعرف انه صايبني نزيف. بعد ما انه خلصت نزيف وكذا صار يرجع يفوتن لعندي مرة تانية، ضلوا تقريبا يفوتن لعندي فترة أسبوع. وكمان نفس الشيء إنه كل ما يفوت لعندي حدا مثلا حاول أمنعه أو شيء، فأحيانا أنا أغيب عن الوعي. فمرة فات لعندي واحد أنا كنت بعرف شكله لأنه كان دائما إنه بسرع على المدرسة، كان دائما يوقف بآخر الحارة يصير يلطش البنات وكذا. فات لعندي هذا الشخص، فأنا عم قل له إنه حاولت إني استعطفه إنه أنا بنت بلدك وكرمال الله لا تعمل معي هيك وكذا. فهو عم بيقول لي يعني إذا أنت غايبة عن الوعي أبوكي ما وفرك، أنا هلا ضلت علي ما وفرك. فأنا كرمال هيك بتوقع إنه أبي نايم معي، بس أنا ما كنت وعيانة يعني على فترة إنه نام معي. بس هو هذا الشخص إنه قال لي إنه أبوكي ما وفرك، فكرمال هيك أنا استنتجت إنه يمكن أبوي يكون نايم معي. حاولت أهرب يعني وقت أبي طالعني على الحمام كنت حاول إني أهرب، بس يعني إذا بدي أطلع من البيت نحن بيتنا ما في له غير باب، يعني باب وحيد إنه للشارع. فإذا بدي أطلع من هذا الباب بدي أكيد المسلحين وهن عنا أكيد رح يشوفوني، لأنه باب البيت مطل على الشباك اللي تبع الغرفة اللي قاعدين فيها المسلحين، فكان من المستحيل إني أطلع من البيت. بعد ما كانوا يطلعوا من عندي كان يحكي لهم قبضني، فأكيد معناته إنه كان ياخذ مصاري. بعد ما دخل الجيش لعنا على البلد على نوى، أبي والمسلحين اللي كانوا معه كلياتهم طلعوا من البلد، يعني طلعوا من نوى وتوجهوا على ضيعة اسمها تسيل هي حد نوى. ورجعت أمي وأخواتي على البيت. بهاي الفترة إنه أنا عم أسأل أمي إنه ليش تركتيني وليش رحتي وأنا هيك صار معي، عم أحكي لها إنه شو صار معي، بس هي يعني إنه كانت تحكي لي إنه كل شي صار معك معلش، وما كان يعني إذا بدك تحكي لحدا بدي أضربك بدي موتك، يعني ما كان عندها أي معنى، يعني ما حاولت تهديني، ما حاولت تعمل أي شيء إنه تقول غصب أو شيء، لا، بس إنه كانت تقول إذا بتحكي لحدا أو بتجيبي هاي السيرة لحدا أنا رح أضربك رح موتك. فبعد هيك كان أبي دائما كمان يتصل في أمي وإنه يطلبها كرمال تروح لعنده على الضيعة اللي هو فيها. فكانت هي الصبح تطلع من البيت قبل ما تطلع تغير أواعيها الداخلية والخارجية وتطلع ترجع المساء. بعد ما ترجع كانت دائما تتحمم. فأنا استنتجت من هاي الشغلات كلياتها إنه هي أكيد كانت تروح لعنده وكمان كانت تعمل يلي بيسموه إنه جهاد النكاح. بعد فترة اتصل أبي في أمي وعم بيقول لها إنه جيبي لي روان وتعالي. فأنا استخلصت إنه أكيد هو بده يعني يروح لعنده على هي الضيعة كرمال إنه يعمل معي مثل ما كان يعمل معي أول شي، فكرة جهاد النكاح. كرمال هيك أنا أول شي قلت لأمي طيب أوكي، لبسنا وجهزنا حالنا طلعنا بالسيرفيس يعني رايحين على التسيل. هنيك مرينا بحاجز كان بآخر نواة، فصرت أنا صرخ وعيط على هذا الحاجز. نزلوني هنن الجيش، نزلوني سألوني إنه شو صاير معك شو كذا، فأنا قلت لهم إنه شو صاير معي طالبة حمايتكم، فهن حطوا لي مركز الرعاية ووصلوني لهاي المرحلة اللي أنا فيها.
This report contains graphic images. Viewer discretion is highly advised. There is a power moving through the desert of Syria and Iraq faster than any invading army or sandstorm. Their influence and wealth grow by the day. Their acts of extremism and terror grow by the hour. Join me, Avi Oren, as we explore the Wahhabi terrorist group known as ISIS, the Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant, in this special edition of American Empire.
Prime Minister calling for a state of emergency after hundreds of gunmen took control of strategic parts of the northern city of Mosul. Our senior international correspondent Nick Robertson tracking this story from Doha in Qatar for us. Nick, a stunning defeat for government forces, but really it hasn't come from nowhere. It's been building for months, from Anbar in the west to Samarra, Bukaba and Baghdad, now Mosul.
ISIS is a former affiliate with the terrorist network Al-Qaeda, who supported ISIS in Syria and Iraq until recently. The aim of ISIS is to install a caliphate, a Sunni region of Syria and Iraq where they can impose Sharia law and rule as its government. Although ISIS officially formed in 2007 as the Al-Qaeda affiliate ISI, the Islamic State of Iraq, they can trace their roots back to the invasion of Iraq by US forces in 2003. They achieved their notoriety during the civil war in Syria, where they now control hundreds of square miles of territory and villages. After amassing manpower, money, and weapons caches, ISIS now rivals the size, scope, and funding of many nations' armies. ISIS already controls vast amounts of land, military bases, including former US bases, and major cities across Iraq, and shows no sign of stopping. Although ISIS began its major combat operations in Syria in 2011, it has now begun its assault on Iraq.
An Iraqi city where some of the fiercest fighting took place in the early years of the Iraq War is now in the hands of forces linked to Al-Qaeda. Insurgents have seized Fallujah in western Iraq. This is the worst violence against the Iraqi government since U.S. forces left the country in December of 2011.
In January 2014, a devastating force moved into the city of Fallujah, Iraq, and took control from the Iraqi government. Iraq's Anbar province was the scene of a bloody three-way war between ISIS, local tribes, and the Iraqi security forces for control of the city. During the chaos, ISIS stormed into the city and by nightfall on January 3, 2014, had raised its black flag on government buildings in Fallujah. Before that, Anbar province was the scene of some of the deadliest combat U.S. forces faced since the Vietnam War. An estimated one-third of the 4,486 U.S. deaths in Iraq were caused by Al-Qaeda in Iraq, the main militant movement that would later spawn ISIS almost a decade later. Fallujah was then used as a staging ground for what can only be compared to as a blitzkrieg by ISIS forces 6 months later after its fall. The capture of Fallujah made headlines around the world, only to quickly fall by the wayside and into obscurity of the mainstream media and American social consciousness.
We now have the full autopsy results for actor Paul Walker. The report shows the Fast and Furious star did not have drugs or alcohol in his system when he died in a fiery crash in November.
Frozen's billion-dollar box office. Disney's Frozen is officially the highest-grossing animated movie of all time.
Iron Man's box office gold. Iron Man 3 remains in first place at the box office for the second week, earning $72.5 million.
So what does it tell us? It tells us, one, the plane took off. It tells us where it went, the direction, and tells us that it was missing.
So that's like the duh factor of
That
this
is the
report.
duh factor.
In the 6 months since the capture of Fallujah, over 7,500 Iraqis have died in the sectarian violence heavily led by Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and other Wahhabi militias. Since the capture of Fallujah, ISIS has blazed a path across the Iraqi desert, taking the cities of Mosul, Baji, Tikrit, Samarra, and are heading towards the cities of Jalula, with Baghdad as its ultimate goal.
This is not good, though.
It's not good.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, though, too, is we're going to talk about Mosul and Tikrit, obviously on the way potentially to Baghdad. You say it's less about speed and more about momentum.
It really is. You know, when you talk about speed and the speed of the operations, the speed that concerns me was the collapse of the Iraqi military in the vicinity of Mosul and then en route to Tikrit. This is a major line of communications. You have to control this if you're eventually going to get to Baghdad,
right,
conducting operations from this location. So once you gain some speed vis-a-vis the enemy,
right,
it's all about momentum, and you're not going to stop. And that's what we see right now is ISIS increasing its rate of momentum.
While only 3.5% of Muslims consider themselves followers of Wahhabism, the movement is considered to be one of the most extreme and fundamental of all Islamic beliefs. Al-Qaeda is considered one of the most dangerous terrorist organizations in the world and is a major supporter of Wahhabism and Sharia law. The organization START conducted an analysis of terrorist attacks around the world in 2012 and concluded that over 8,500 terrorist attacks killed almost 16,000 people. 6 of the 7 deadliest terror groups that year were affiliates of Al-Qaeda. As the country of Iraq descends into collapse, we take a look into how this was all started.
Do you think that the U.S. or UN forces should have moved into Baghdad?
No.
Why not?
Because if we'd gone to Baghdad, we would have been all alone. There wouldn't have been anybody else with us. It would have been a U.S. occupation of Iraq. None of the Arab forces that were willing to fight with us in Kuwait were willing to invade Iraq.
On my orders, coalition forces have begun striking selected targets of military importance to undermine Saddam Hussein's ability to wage war. These are opening stages of what will be a broad and concerted campaign. More than 35 countries are giving crucial support, from the use of naval and air bases to help with intelligence and logistics to the deployment of combat units. Every nation in this coalition has chosen to bear the duty and share the honor of serving in our common defense.
Once you got to Iraq and took it over and took down Saddam Hussein's government, then what are you going to put in its place? That's a very volatile part of the world, and if you take down the central government in Iraq, you can easily end up seeing pieces of Iraq fly off.
People have been gathering in Salmania's main square for nearly 3 months now, protesting what they allege is government corruption, nepotism, incompetence, and anti-democratic measures. Since then, at least 12 civilians have been killed across Iraqi Kurdistan, as military forces of the ruling parties were deployed in the restive areas. The protests and the accompanying violence have pushed the government and the opposition parties further away from each other than ever. Masoud Barzani, the president of the region, recently accused the opposition of trying to stage a coup, an accusation that is vigorously rejected.
The other thing was casualties. Everyone was impressed with the fact that we were able to do our job with as few casualties as we had. But for the 146 Americans killed in action and for their families, it wasn't a cheap war. And the question for the president, in terms of whether or not we went on to Baghdad and took additional casualties in an effort to get Saddam Hussein, was how many additional dead Americans is Saddam worth? And our judgment was not very many, and I think we got it right.
When the United States invaded Iraq, it left a major power vacuum that it could not fill. After many attempts at stabilizing the Iraqi military and government, U.S. forces left the country in 2011. Sectarian violence rose to an all-time high, creating an uncontrollable environment for the Iraqi security forces to maintain. Following the civil war in 2011 and destabilization of its neighbor Syria, Iraq would fall victim to the same fate of its northern neighbor just a few years later. ISIS has a bankroll of over $2 billion, making it the wealthiest jihadist group in the world. During the ISIS invasion of Iraq, they looted the Iraqi central bank, where they gained much of their wealth. The question still remains: who was funding the organization before the Iraqi invasion, and why did Al-Qaeda break its ties with ISIS?
Al-Qaeda has cut ties with an affiliate it says is too extreme. The terror group says it's not responsible for what the Islamic State of Iraq and al-Sham is doing in Syria. It's surprising in a sense because ISIS claims allegiance to Al-Qaeda. An expert on militant Islam at the Brookings Institution put it this way to the New York Times: ISIS is now officially the biggest and baddest global jihadi group on the planet. Nothing's as hardcore like being cast out by Al-Qaeda. Still, it's a move that's likely been in the works for some time. As a writer for the Daily Beast notes, the group has been known to disobey. One of the reasons for the disavowal may be that al-Baghdadi's defiance was beginning to threaten al-Zawahiri's authority.
But this is a jihadist group so extreme, even Al-Qaeda wants nothing to do with them.
We're in a pretty scary place if Al-Qaeda is disavowing people for their violence.
As these graphic photos show, in recent months, the group has executed enemies in Syria and then staged their deaths to look like crucifixions. And ISIS is apparently looking to the future, openly recruiting young boys and running schools to radicalize Syria's next generation.
The Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant, otherwise known as ISIS, has threatened to leave the city of Aleppo to the Assad regime unless rival rebel groups stop their attacks against the Al-Qaeda-affiliated group within 24 hours. An alliance of rebel forces calling themselves the Army of Mujahideen have reportedly inflicted significant losses against ISIS in recent days, as more moderate rebels try to retake the initiative from ISIS, which stands accused of imposing a reign of terror on territory it controls. Syria's main opposition movement, the Syrian National Council, yesterday endorsed their fellow rebels' fight against ISIS and called on all Syrian rebels who have joined the Al-Qaeda-linked group to abandon it and for ISIS leadership to be prosecuted.
ISIS is led by Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. He was once captured by American forces and spent 4 years in Camp Bucca in Iraq and was released in the year 2009. The U.S. did not consider him dangerous upon his release, but investigators have found very little information on who al-Baghdadi is, earning him the nickname the Ghost. He's an educated man with university degrees in Islamic studies and history. When or where he became radicalized is still unknown. His political ties and affiliations are also unreported, but a simple examination of his group's funding quickly reveals who is backing ISIS. And although it only represents a tiny minority of Muslims, its believers are far from minorities themselves. A majority of the world's Wahhabis are from Qatar at 46%, the United Arab Emirates at 44%, and Saudi Arabia at 22%. These three countries represent some of the wealthiest Islamic states in the world, with Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates coming in the top 2 GDPs at over $1 trillion a year combined. They also have some of the largest concentrations of Sunni Muslims, who only make up about 22% of all Muslims worldwide. These three countries are also supposed allies of the United States and share a similar disinterest in Syrian President Bashar al-Assad and the Iranian government.
The Council on Foreign Relations reports most of ISIS's financing comes from smuggling, extortion, and other crimes. ISIS is even cashing in on oil, selling crude from oil fields they took control of in northern Syria right back to the Syrian government. The New York Times reports ISIS is also selling electricity from captured power plants back to the government too.
They also do a lot of the traditional terrorist fundraising activities, kidnapping, robbing, thieving, they're involved in the drug trade. They have money laundering schemes.
In the Daily Beast, Josh Rogin reports that ISIS has also been funded for years by wealthy private donors living in countries the U.S. considers allies, countries like Kuwait, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia, and that those governments, says Rogin, know it's happening but choose to look away.
The governments could have some plausible deniability and say they weren't funding them directly. At the very least, they were looking the other way.
Now back to the numbers. If you do the math, ISIS may be worth at least $500 million after that last attack on that bank in Mosul. In 2011, the Taliban was said to be worth an estimated $70 million to $400 million. Even Al-Qaeda can't compete. Al-Qaeda had an operating budget of about $30 million a year before the 9/11 attacks. And all of this cash on hand only allows ISIS to attract more extremist fighters who are drawn to higher salaries. Big money also helps ISIS finance large-scale prison raids, liberating hundreds of fighters who then join their ranks.
With a professional terrorist army with seemingly unlimited funds and backed by some of the wealthiest Arab countries in the world, the future of Iraq seems to be in question. Currently, the United States has deployed a few hundred Marines to secure the embassy in Baghdad and has hundreds more sitting in the Gulf.
President Obama has ordered up to 275 Marines back into the war-torn nation of Iraq. Military members ordered back to the country will be equipped for combat, according to official records. This follows gains made by the armed groups in the country, including a takeover of Mosul, the second largest city in Iraq. The government of Iran offered to assist Washington in military strikes against the militants, and this prompted the first discussions in a decade between the nations over a common security interest.
While pundits discuss the future of Iraq from air-conditioned studios, many countries are appealing to the United States for intervention, including Iraq's own prime minister.
Iraq's Shiite-led government has formally asked the United States to launch airstrikes against Sunni Muslim insurgents who have engulfed the country in fighting and battled their way into Iraq's biggest oil refinery. In a televised address, Iraq's prime minister called for his country's tribes to fight back against the Sunni militants. Kurdish Peshmerga troops have joined the effort to defeat the advance, although they're focused on securing the Kurdish region to the north. The insurgents have their sights set on Baghdad to the south. These militant fighters are led by the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, which aims to build an independent Sunni Muslim emirate in the region. ISIL's surge may pose the biggest security threat to Iraq since the sectarian bloodshed that followed the US-led invasion to oust Saddam Hussein in 2003.
And in a bizarre twist of fate, Iran, a longtime enemy of the United States, has expressed interest in working with the US on a solution to help end the violence in Iraq. Iran holds an overwhelming Shia majority of 87%, as does Iraq with 61%. Iran has long expressed interest in having closer ties with Iraq since the overthrow of Saddam Hussein in 2003. Iran also has a security pact with Syria, which is why the United States has been funding Al-Qaeda-affiliated groups with weapons and money to fight its proxy war in Syria. Can the U.S. ally with Iran to defeat ISIS, an organization armed and partially funded by CIA operations in Syria? Or is the conflict of interest too great for the United States to take assistance from its long-standing enemy Iran? As the fate of Iraq hangs in the balance between forces it seems to have little control over, only time will tell if the world can intervene on its behalf or watch as Iraq is destroyed from the outside in.